Yesterday, we had a little dust up with one of the guys from James, one of the James gang. A.K. Richardson came over to our little live stream, and he's a champ. He is a champ because for two reasons. One, he was really a good sport to come over and have a talk with us and explore these topics about the deity of God as opposed to free will, the circumcision gospel as opposed to the uncircumcision gospel, whether or not salvation is the work of God or is it the work of the free will man. Anyway, so he was a champ to come over there and defend the circumcision gospel as well as he did. And so he's a champ for coming over, and he's also a champion of the circumcision gospel. Now, what we're going to do here is I want to prove, not from Paul's writings versus Peter, James, and John, comparing those two writings to prove that there is a difference, a wild difference. I want to show you right from the book of Acts that there's a big difference between where Paul was going and where James is going. Okay? So, let's get started. This is a study in the book of Acts. We're spending a lot of time there at the moment, okay? Paul versus James, proof that there are two evangels. Acts 15 versus Acts 17. Okay, so here's the setup. Now, what was going on over in Antioch was so incredible, so amazing. God was bringing in the Gentiles into the way. He was giving them faith. And they didn't even have to be circumcised, and they didn't have to be proselytes first, right? It was just like wildly different than what went on over in Jerusalem. But Jerusalem was where God started this whole thing after the resurrection of Christ. So of course they have some power, right? They have some precedent. They were there first, so they get to have like a big seat at the table, at the head of the table. Okay, so the setup is certain men came from James and went down to Antioch and caused a lot of trouble. They caused even Peter to act like a hypocrite, a damn hypocrite, and to be self-censored. You can read about it in Acts chapter 15, and you can also read about it in Galatians chapter 2, that it was a big fight between God's grace and a bunch of works-oriented knuckleheads from James, okay? And so there was such a fight about it, there was such a big fight about it, that the James gang said, they held up their hand, like talk to the hand, and they said to Paul, we don't want to talk to you anymore. Because Paul was defending the Gentile brothers and sisters, defending them and not, making them obey the law. So Paul was defending them, and so they didn't want to talk to him anymore because his defense was so good. They said, we don't want to talk to you anymore. You have to go to Jerusalem and let James straighten your butt out. Okay, so Paul and Barnabas head over to Jerusalem, and here's what you need to know. Verse 7 of chapter 15. Now, there coming to be much questioning. And this is like an understatement here, right? There coming to be much questioning. Peter said to them, men, brethren, you are versed in the fact that from the days of the beginning God chooses among you that through my mouth the nations are to hear the word of the evangel. What does that mean? That means Peter was chosen to go talk to Cornelius and Cornelius's large household and bring to them the word of the evangel. It was Peter, okay? James didn't go there. Peter did. I want you to see that. Okay, so, and God, the knower of hearts, testifies. We're in verse 8. And God, the knower of hearts, testifies to them, giving them the Holy Spirit according as to us also. And in nothing discriminates us and them. In nothing discriminates us and them, cleansing their hearts by faith. We have a wonderful privilege here, okay? Verse 10. Why then are you now trying God? Now he's talking to the Judaizers, those boys from James who were trying to upset the Gentile brothers in Antioch. And he says, why are you trying God? In other words, you're getting on God's nerves. And it's pissing him off. He has every right to be pissed off. Why are you getting on God's nerves? By placing a yoke on the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor we are strong enough to bear. Do you hear this? This is the glorious gospel words, good news words dropping out of Peter's mouth. They're so wonderful. In other words, stop annoying God by placing a yoke on the neck of the Gentile disciples, which neither our fathers nor we are strong enough to bear. Verse 11, but through the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, we are believing to be saved in a manner as they. There's some good news going on here. Now, the entire multitude hushes. They hush. Okay? When Peter said this, the entire multitude shuts up. And they heard Barnabas and Paul unfolding whatever signs and miracles God does among the nations, the Gentiles, through them. All right, now, as soon as James could get in a word in edgewise, here's what happened. I entitled this little section here, James trying to steal the show and get in the last word. Okay, so verse 13. Now, after they hush, James answering said, men, now notice, this is a big word salad, but there is something here you got to see, okay? Men, brethren, hear me. Simon Peter unfolds how God first visits the Gentile boys and girls to obtain out of them a people for his name. And with this, agree the words of the prophets, according as is written, after these things I will turn back and I will rebuild the tabernacle of David which has fallen, and its overturned structure I will rebuild, and I will re-erect it. Now I put that in not yellow but green so you can see it, right? Somehow James thinks that this tabernacle of David is a big to-do. I don't know what his mentality is. I don't know where he's going with this. I don't truly, personally understand the gospel of the circumcision as well as I might, and I'm just not interested that much in the gospel of the circumcision. I admit that there's something there, but I'm a fan of Paul. I'm stuck on Paul, okay? So I don't know what this business is about rebuilding the tabernacle of David. Okay, so verse 17. So that those left of mankind should be seeking out the Lord, and all the nations on them over whom my name is invoked is saying, the Lord who is doing all these things. Doesn't this sound confusing? I don't know what this guy's about. It's like he went to a class on neurolinguistic programming and he's just trying to hypnotize these people. And I don't even want to struggle to find out what he's saying. It's so word salady. Verse 18, I thought verse 18 was cool. That's why I bolded it. Known from the eon to the Lord is his work. Now that sounds cool. That might be worth exploring. But the rest of this crap, I don't know what James is all about. Verse 19, wherefore I decided not to be harassing those from the nations who are turning back to God, but to write an epistle to them, to be abstaining from ceremonial pollution with idols and prostitution and what is strangled, and blood. For Moses, from the ancient generation, city by city, has those who are heralding him being read on every Sabbath in the synagogues. So that is right there. That is James stealing the thunder, getting the last word. And it sounds important because you don't know exactly what he was on about. However, I want to point out this verse 16. He says, He's quoting, I will rebuild the tabernacle of David, which has fallen, and its overturned structure I will rebuild. Now get this. So we look at verse 16. Now let's go over to Acts 17. We're going to hop 2 chapters. Paul has long left this argument between Antioch church and the Jerusalem church. He's moved on. And in verse 17, he's out there talking to more Gentiles, right? Finally, Paul gets to speak. Now, he's not speaking to the church in Jerusalem. He's just speaking in this section we're going to read. And in this section, he kind of busts James as yak to pieces. Now, get this. Now, verse 22 of Acts 17. Now, Paul, standing in the center of the Areopagus, averred, men, Athenians. So Paul's in Athens, right? He's moved on from Jerusalem. He's not even in Antioch. He's in Athens. Men, Athenians, on all sides, I am beholding how unusually religious you are. For passing through and contemplating the objects of your veneration, I found a pedestal also, on which has been inscribed, to an unknowable God. To whom then you are ignorantly devout, this one I am announcing to you. Okay, let's bold that, because that's where it's going to get hot and juicy right here. This one I am announcing to you. The God who makes the world and all that is in it, he, the Lord, inherent of heaven and earth, is not dwelling in temples made by hands. That's the kicker phrase right here. We're going to bold it. We'll put it in yellow. God is not dwelling in temples made by hands. Verse 25, neither is he attended by human hands, as if requiring anything. In other words, as if requiring anything, this free will business, God doesn't need your free will. And neither is he attended by human hands, as if requiring anything, since he himself gives life, gives to all, life and breath and all. He himself gives to all, life and breath and all right? And then hop down here, because we're short on time. Verse 28, for in him we are living and moving and are, as some of your poets have declared. Bold, underline, italics. Okay. For in him we are living and moving and are. And we'll yellow out that. For in him we are living and moving and are. He is not dwelling in temples made by hands. So this is the heart. This is like, even before Paul started writing his letters to explain the difference between the gospel of the circumcision and the gospel of the uncircumcision, here's a prequel to the whole matter. Paul says to the Athenians, God is not dwelling in temples made by hands, and he is making this a very important point. But we jump back up here to James's yak, and James says, he's making a big point of, I will rebuild the tabernacle of David, which has fallen, and its overturned structure I will rebuild, and I will re-erect it. Okay, so 3 times. I will rebuild, number 1, the tabernacle of David, which has fallen. Its overturned structure I will rebuild. Number 2, I will re-erect it. So 3 times he's on about this rebuilding of the tabernacle of David. And Paul says that God is not dwelling in temples made by hands. Can you see the power of what's going on here? There's 2 different premises altogether. Paul is not putting up with the circumcision gospel, because the circumcision gospel is not for us. Our gospel, the gospel of the uncircumcision, is built on the idea that for in him we are living and moving and are, and it's built on the idea that God gives life and breath and all to all. Okay? God gives life and breath. Verse 25, he gives life and breath and all to all. Oh, man, okay? So can you see? James is all about rebuilding the tabernacle, and Paul is all about, that God doesn't dwell in temples made by hands. That's the big deal, and I wanted you to see that.